For those of you who worked for rich people, what is the most out-of-touch thing you witnessed? I worked at a company where the payroll went out late a few times in 3 months. This wasn't a cash flow problem. The owners just didn't care enough to submit payroll on time. An entry-level employee sent an email to the entire staff saying she wouldn't be coming into work until she was paid. I then received an email from the owner of the company asking for, quote, a list of employees that need to be paid on time. Next story. I don't work for any rich people. I work for myself and I'm definitely not rich, but I just delivered a used ice maker to a rich dude today that he bought from me on Facebook. He was out of town for a week, but gave me a deposit to hold it for him till he got back. This is basically a half-size commercial ice machine. Needs to be plumbed in, etc. When he sent me the address today, I was thinking he didn't understand what he bought, because the address was a fancy house in a fancy part of town. He asked me to deliver it not too far from my restaurant, so fine. I show up, go through the locked gate, and knock on his full copper doors. He comes out and says he's from Florida, we're on the West Coast, and he just loves ice. He told me at his Florida home he has an ice machine and 2 fridges with ice machines. Here he has an ice machine, 2 more fridges with ice machines, and that he's going to put this one downstairs. The best part was him saying, I've got crushed ice, cubed ice, round ice, basically everything. So now he gets another type of round ice. A super nice guy, but what a hobby. Next story. I worked as a lifeguard for a rich family 7 days a week, 8 hours a day in the summer. The kids would go to a summer camp for 6 weeks in the summer. The husband worked a 9 to 5 every day, and the wife would drive around all day calling people on the phone when they first came out. They would buy new cars every 2 years. The husband hit a curb with a 3-month-old car, got a flat tire, and instead of, having the flat change, he called the dealer and had a new car delivered to where the other one was disabled. I don't get that. Surely that last one doesn't even save any time, right? It would be the same amount of time to just get a new tire on there, I would think. Like, okay, the time of the tire change, whatever, but it's still, someone would drive out there and help you do it and then you're on your way. But I guess if the amount of time it would take to change a tire is, to you, equal the price of a new car, fair enough, I guess. Next story. CEO laid off 1,000 people and cried because it, quote, was very traumatic. The next week, he did an interview in the local paper talking about the 30,000 square foot climate-controlled addition to his home to use as a museum for his collection of historical artifacts, and the several $100,000 he spent on real cherry wood paneling instead of the cheap stuff that's just done in a cherry stain. Next story. Owner of the company I worked at held weekly meetings with office staff, not very productive, usually just a chance for him to rant randomly about things. First day he was back from a 3-week family vacation to Italy paid for by the struggling company was meeting day. He spent an hour lecturing us that we weren't being good parents if we didn't take our kids to Europe and let them experience the world, then proceeded to demand answers for why locations didn't flow cash the previous month when they paid for said vacation. Half of the people in the meeting made less than $20 an hour. 3 of them resigned the next day. Next story. I dated a girl who at 25 didn't know how to use the washing machine at my house. I asked how she had never used one and she said, I don't know, that's what the people do. The people? Yeah, like the helpers at the house. Next story. I read an article in the little local paper in the Hamptons during COVID. Tons of rich people moved out there full-time that year, and all the interviews were like, it's so hard to get a nail appointment or landscapers or reservation. No one is doing house calls anymore. And one dude made sure to stress that not only did he learn how to mow his lawn, but he did it in $700 sneakers. I always wondered who he thought he was impressing in the friggin' Hamptons with the price of his sneakers. Also once overheard a college kid talk about taking what was essentially a helicopter Uber to get out there from the city. That actually sounds sick as hell. Next story. Didn't work for but was engaged to one. I had to teach her how to make her own bed and do her own laundry. She thought true poverty, her words, wasn't something in the first world countries, but that people were just bad with money. She grew up in a bubble of other rich people. I was her first non-rich friend and eventual partner. She wasn't a bad person by any means, just extremely sheltered. She changed drastically after meeting me and experiencing some real-world shock. Her words. I had her live on my budget for 2 weeks, and it truly changed her perspective and gave her a lot of empathy. We didn't work out, but are still friends. One of the few rich people I admire because she uses her wealth to help others in need. It's always nice when people with generational wealth use it for things that actually matter in the world. Like, I'll be straight up, recognizing one's own privileged situation is not easy. Your brain is hardwired from when you're young of like, this is all normal. There are just people in the house to do my laundry and, I don't know, pick out clothes for me and do my hair. That's normal. So to be able to take a step back and be like, oh, so my life was really, really easy. Well, okay, I shouldn't say easy, but like, had a lot of money. It's impressive in a way. I'm glad for this person, and I'm particularly glad they met OP, and it seemed to wake them up to the real world a bit. Next story. I built a $40 million house for a billionaire. They changed so many things, and it would be after we bought all of the finishes. We had 3 storage units full of stuff that they had bought and then didn't use. A $9,000 stove was the biggest item I can think of. The thing has been in storage for 2 years. Just wasteful. Next story. I once worked as a housemaid/cook for minor nobility in England in the 1980s. He was the noble, she married in. She would ring a little bell to get me to climb up 2 stories to pass her a handkerchief from the other side of the bed. She never got up before midday. She sacked me suddenly after hiring a cheap young girl from Lancashire to become nursemaid/housemaid/cook. The poor girl had no idea what she was getting into. Rather than pay me out, her ladyship made up a whole lot of complaints and kicked me out that day. It left me broke and alone and very far from home. I'm an Aussie, but I managed, and it was just another backpacking adventure. And before I left, I made sure to go out to their garden shed and unplug their freezer where that season's pheasants were stored. Next story. I work in a dementia ward where most nurses are paid the lowest you can legally pay people, and our CEO released a monthly newsletter which features him on his custom-made Harley Davidson, or his yacht, or at the World Cup. He gives these out-of-touch updates about his life and successes. One time we all went out on strike and his newsletter was another image of himself looking sad, standing outside his mansion with his family, boo-hooing that we were behaving so badly, even though we were the lowest paid staff in this industry in the country. Watched him get fatter and fatter, redder and redder in the face. Left there years ago, but have friends who say he still is like that. Next story. Second degree here, but owner of a company flew their family to a Caribbean island during a hurricane to avoid having to deal with it. Then, while the hurricane was battering our city, called their nanny/personal assistant who was hunkering down and weathering the storm to have them call the resort the family was staying at to arrange things like spa/massages/meals, etc. Next story. I was a nanny for a very wealthy family. They bought a brand new SUV for me to drive the children to the occasional doctor's appointment or play date. I overheard the mom telling someone that she would never drive such a cheaply made car, but it was, quote, fine for the nanny and the kids. It was a BMW. The crazy things that they'd throw away. Their dog peed on the bottom of the new $6,000 custom-made drapes, and they just chucked them in the trash. Next story. He was the CEO at the time, retail. This was after the worst of COVID. During COVID, they had discovered that they could run the stores on skeleton crews, 2 to 3 people for a whole day. We used to have 5 to 6 for a whole day. This was stressing people out, as they still expected all the tasks to be done. We cut a bunch of the less critical tasks per day, but there's still customers, compliance stuff, keeping records, etc. A colleague of mine confronted him about this during a visit, saying we were understaffed and that people were getting stressed out with all the extra work, saying that we had people on the books but weren't being given the hours necessary to maintain the stores. His response was, well, that's just your perception. No, jerk face, it's our experience. Next story. Worked on 2 houses being built for a couple in a very nice area. A fantastic house and a somewhat, but only somewhat, more modest house. I was a subcontractor, and I got to speak with the lady of the houses one afternoon, and why 2 houses? Says I. Oh, she says, we have 2 houses all over the country. You never know who the kids are going to bring home with them, so they all stay in that house and we stay in this one. Oh, of course. Next story. Didn't work with him, but in college my roommate got offended when I told him I couldn't go on a multi-flight tour with him to Africa. I was like, dude, I need to work all summer to afford anything next year. I couldn't even buy the ticket if I wanted to. Kid was flabbergasted that my parents couldn't just fund a summer-long trip for me. Next story. I used to be valet at this really fancy business company. Porsches every day. This guy told me I could take it for a spin without a single worry in the world. Trusting a stranger with your luxury car is insane. I also used to work at a private preschool that would charge the parents like $1,000 a week. Your child isn't learning any curriculum yet. We're just feeding them and letting them run around outside. Next story. Why why haven't you bought a house yet? Meanwhile, this was in L.A., where the housing market is stupidly expensive. Then she said, my grandson has one already, so why shouldn't you? Meanwhile, I was working a minimum wage job, and she must have forgotten that she told me she helped her grandson buy his house. Ha! Next story. I worked a season for an interior decorator at the Yellowstone Club. When people wanted new bedding, books, anything they wanted replaced, they just threw out. Pillows and blankets that were never used in guest bedrooms were like fast food napkins to them. They couldn't be seen with the same decorations as last year by their guests. Next story. Private jet world. You would have 2, maybe 3 identical private jets on the ramp. A married couple would pull up in separate cars with their other boyfriend or girlfriend in the passenger seat in front of others, said wife or husband. Kids would pull up with the nanny in another car, then decide if they're riding in mom's jet or dad's jet. They would just hop in and go. Then the luggage and various things the family bought would get shoved, sometimes in a third jet, just as cargo. Never seen so much FU money in my life. Next story. She had a concierge service. Whatever she needed, she just called a number, and they made it happen. Anything from a private flight to having a full suite of camping equipment delivered in less than 2 hours and packed in her car so she could escape for the weekend and unplug. When she got back, she called the same number, and an hour later, the equipment was gone from her trunk and the car was detailed. By ghosts, apparently, because they were so invisible. She also had her pool cleaned before 6 a.m. because she hated seeing the guys in the yard. It scared her to see strangers. Next story. I was early 20s and took my brother-in-law's friend's parents out for lunch while they were visiting the city I lived in as a favor. They, A, had a high-end hotel suite as their base, which they didn't check out of while they were traveling and staying around the country for a few months. They wanted a home away from home between trips. B, they had several sets of their favorite brand of sheets, pillows, and duvets sent to the hotel exclusively for their stay. C, they didn't realize a vineyard was 2.5 hours from one of the lodges they were staying at. A waiter mentioned it to them at dinner. They asked the hotel concierge to organize a helicopter for the next morning, which they did. And D, I spoke about how my city had one of the highest house prices relative to incomes in the world, to which they suggested buying a house in one of the most expensive suburbs in the country because it seemed quaint and cheap, and a good way to quickly get on the ladder. Houses started at around $2 million. I was earning like $80K. In hindsight, I shouldn't have paid for lunch. Maybe this is due to how I was raised, but I've always thought that taking someone out for food isn't necessarily about the amount of money that either of you have. It's a gesture, right? It's like you could have all the money in the world. Sure, you can pay for this, you can go to restaurants all the time, but I don't know. It's a show of respect and in some way a show of love. I definitely understand it being a little annoying if your friend who has a 9-figure bank account is ordering a bunch of expensive stuff that you're paying for. That's fair. But if it's just like a normal taking them out for lunch thing, like sure, they don't need the money, but that's not the point to me. Next story. In the late 2000s, during the Great Recession, I was helping my dad deliver a fully decked out playhouse to an auction winner's house. The guy had paid like $30,000 for the thing and thousands more to have it delivered. It was a full operation with cranes and everything. The owner of the house comes out and starts lecturing a bunch of blue-collar workers about how he had been affected by the recession. I'll never forget the way he said, without a hint of irony, that, quote, "This economy is hard on me too." Bro paid more for a playhouse than any of the delivery crew guys made in a year. And he has the gall to give them a sob story about how hard things are for him. I was 16 and kind of oblivious, but even I was stunned. Next story. I worked security in luxury hotels for a long time, so I've got a lot of these. The one that comes to mind right now is when a guy crashed his new BMW SUV into a light pole on our property, which not only knocked it down, but also took 2 of our security cameras mounted on it. When we approached him, he just gave us insurance info and walked off to have a picnic with his girlfriend. Next story. I've recently been working with a really lovely woman downsizing an estate. She was leaving a vast majority of the furniture and artwork behind as she didn't want to bother moving it. Some key highlights. A painting worth about $3,000 that she didn't really want but didn't bother selling. So it is sitting behind in the garage as I could not bring myself to throw it out. I gave away about 10 others, lesser value, giving away dinner sets worth about $1,000 each because we just needed them gone, costume jewelry, the bottom of the drawer, the scrappy bits of broken stuff being bundled up and worth $4,500. $1,000. I took it to Gold Buyer on her behalf, having to try to convince her to let me give away brand new excess items and her being utterly flabbergasted that people would drive to the estate to pick them up. It was incomprehensible that someone would come and pick up $150 worth of cleaning products. I had to get her over the line, allowing people to come onto the property. Lovely woman, not that out of touch, but certainly when you have sold a property for that much, little details like this become tedious. Next story. My old boss wanted 2 papers every day, something like the Miami Herald and the Financial Times, whilst on his yacht. Big yacht. If the local hotels didn't have them, a crew member would have to go in to get them. Once, someone had to fly from Saint Martin to Guadalupe for a copy of the Miami Herald. He would also book out a whole restaurant if he wanted to eat out, so he could have dinner at dinner time in his own personal time zone wherever he was in the world. He traveled with a personal doctor, hairdresser, and masseuse as his immediate entourage. Next story. In a conversation with a friend who had a rich girl that was going out with her friend, she was asked if she wanted to come along to a concert. When my friend said no because she didn't have money for it, the girl said, "Just go to the bank and get some." She thought everyone had millions sitting in the bank for their use. Next story. I was on a business trip in London with him. Walking down the street, I got a call telling me my apartment was flooded and all of my things were damaged. I told him what just happened, and I was distraught. He responded by pointing into a window of a store and asking, should I buy that tie? Next story. I had a friend who owned a limousine service. I would drive them on occasion. A regular customer was a college student going to school in Colorado whose parents lived in Dubai. Every other weekend, I would pick the kid up on a Friday and drive him to the airport where his parents had their private jet to fly him home for the weekend. I usually picked him back up Monday afternoons or evening. They paid very well, so I didn't mind doing it. By the way, kid was usually drunk when I picked him up on Friday. I mean, hey, if you know you don't have to drive and you're just going to be traveling, why not get drunk on a Friday night as a college student? That seems pretty par for the course, rich or not. But also, flying home every weekend, I don't care how much money you have, that just sounds like a huge waste of time. You're going to spend what, like 30 hours there in total, maybe less? I don't know how long a flight from the US to Dubai takes, but I can't imagine it's short. Anyway, I don't go on planes a lot, as I'm sure you can tell. So the thought of a long flight, it hurts my soul. Next story. I was in a house in a gated community in Newport Beach, California. It was one of the most expensive communities in Orange County. After I had already arrived, the woman living there had guests coming. She was maybe mid-50s. Hard to say because she had clearly had work done on her. The guests were 3 high school girls, and it appeared she was mentoring them. It was the first time they had met. After greetings and introductions, one girl asked, "How was your day?" The woman answered, "Oh, it was busy. I went to the gym, I had my nails done. It was already 3 p.m. To be fair, my sleep schedule's so screwed up that sounds like a busy day by 3 p.m. I, however, am not a good frame of reference. Next story. I grew up with close friends in gated communities and $2 to $5 million homes. Best friend had an aunt and uncle with a $10 million home in Cresskill, New Jersey, and I got to know them very well. It's clear all of these families were filthy rich, but conversely, to all the comments, there wasn't a single instance where they acted out of touch. All of them were hardworking, down-to-earth, caring, and normal. They all lived below their means. There were differences, of course. Different levels of vacations, gifts, purchases, etc. I worked from the moment I turned 14. My friends didn't work until they were seniors in high school. Not even sure why they did then, but they weren't out of touch. Not everyone who's rich is a jerk, even those who grow up knowing nothing else. Next story. Friend used to breed, supply, and train hawks for super rich Arabs. One day he got a call and was asked if he was willing to go to the Range Rover factory and act as hawk consultant to the car designers, as his client wanted basically a desert hunting Range Rover, single thrown in the back that rose up with room for 6 hawks. One good thing was that the welfare of the hawks was as important as the comfort of the client, and all the features he asked for were completed, even if it required some serious thinking on behalf of the engineers. Next story. $1 million home that I was cat-sitting at. The smoke detector battery dies, and I can't change the battery as it's on a vaulted ceiling. Homeowner requested I call the fire department, thinking they changed the battery as a social civil act. Oh, did I mention it's the 4th of July and there's a city festival going on? No, the fire department doesn't want to come and deal with this. $1 million home. Look, man, I live West Coast Canada. $1 million isn't going to get you a whole lot more than you'd think. I feel like the whole dollar value to home ratio vastly depends on where you live. And not I think, I mean, it does. $1 million is going to go a lot further in some places than others. In Vancouver, if you have $1 million cash, you could still easily be looking at a loan. Next story. I was a caddy at one of the most expensive golf clubs in the country. $450,000 initiation fee plus a $50,000 membership fee per year. Most of the members were insanely nice and genuinely showed interest in who you are and your life goals. However, I remember being part of a 4-ball with 2 couples, the members and their friends. The husband had a heart attack and had to be med-flighted off island to a better hospital. He lived and is okay. The wife called the restaurant they were all supposed to be having dinner at that evening and verbatim says, "Hey, I will need to change our reservation. My husband had a heart attack and won't be joining us. It will now just be for 3. Thank you." Absolutely insane. Next story. I was working overnights at a big fancy timeshare, and a guest complained about his friend buying a new jet just to brag that it was better than his. I was like, wow, that's cool. I have to decide if I want food or electricity this week. Thanks for the $2 for parking your car. Next story. I didn't work for him, but my ex-boyfriend's dad is rich, and we went to Georgia for a week to visit. Ex's dad had a house built on a lake in Georgia. There were several things. When showing us around the new house, he mentions that his wife spent $35,000 last month decorating. I ask, $35,000 or $3,500? He repeats, $35,000. Where I live, that's what some people make in a year. He tells us he went and just bought a boat, 4-hour visit. I ask, why not just rent a boat? And he says, why would I do that? I try to rationalize not using it again, storage fees, etc. And he responds once again with, why rent a boat when I can buy a boat? He had recently moved to Georgia from Florida. He had never been to a Walmart before moving to Georgia. He asked if I'd ever been to one and if I'd seen people that go to Walmart, and yes, I have. While telling the story of his trip to Walmart, he says, did you know they sell wine in a box? Yes, I did know that. It's not the best stuff, he says. No, it's not. This is my realization, that social class changes the classifications of alcoholism. They drank several cocktails before dinner, a bottle of wine with dinner, and a couple cocktails after dinner every night. He was slightly offended that I didn't drink with them, but I tried to explain that I'm a recovering addict. But it's alcohol, not drugs. Overall, a really nice guy, and it was a fun trip, but him and I were from very different worlds. Next story. I was an IT intern for some Catholic church priests who wore a lot of jewelry and dressed very luxuriously. Basically, they owned a huge amount of land and had everything they wanted, seemingly funded by the church. The thing is, they never spoke to me or even looked at me. The rule was that if I had to check why the Wi-Fi wasn't working in an area and they entered, I had to leave. The people who were allowed to talk to them referred to them as Your Reverence and other similarly ridiculous titles. This is, more of an issue with mega churches or whatever they're called. But yeah, the huge amount of money that these people at the top seem to make is absurd to me. Do they rationalize it by thinking they're God's chosen to spread his message, so they need the money to do it? Or do they really just, like money? I almost have more respect for the ones that are just straight up shameless about it than I do the people who try to hide behind the ruse. I promise you, man, God does not need you to buy a second jet. The extra legroom won't help you spread his message. Next story. Didn't work for, but went to school with. At the time, we were 14 and 15, and the 2008 recession hit. My friend lives on an estate. They had 4 Bentleys, 4 SUVs, and a bunch of other cars. There were 3 kids, and each had a security guard that doubled as their chauffeur. Dad was a property guy, so 2008 took a hit to his business. Mom was a stay-at-home mom. They sold the estate and many of the cars. One day, someone asked her if she wanted to come to the cinema. She screamed at us. She didn't even know where her next meal was coming from, so no, she couldn't afford to go to the cinema. A short while after this, she had a party at the new house they moved to. She lived in a $1.5 million house in a private community. Average house price in our city, probably around $150,000 to $200,000. They still had 2 of the cars, and Dad was mostly spending his time at their holiday home in Spain. The basement was full of liquor that cost more than my parents' annual salary, and the mom was still a stay-at-home mom. Oh, real tear-jerking poverty. Next story. I nannied for a wealthy family in my early 20s, and it was the lack of actual parenting that I remember most. For instance, the youngest child had behavioral issues, and I took him to his therapy appointments instead of his actual parents. Without going into much detail, I had a knife pulled on me during an overnight stay, and I quit that following morning. Next story. Out-of-town work trip. Rental cars were picked up over at the airport, all compact cars. They went and purchased an Escalade because they were frustrated with the rental car situation. Escalade was left at their in-laws' house a few hours away for use on future trips. Coworker drove the Escalade there and Ubered to the airport. They were great people to work for, just living in a different world. Next story. When we were 16 or 17, my rich friend was tasked by her dad to buy her grandmother a nice handbag for her birthday. My friend brought me along for the shopping trip. Along with the handbag, she put a $1,200 watch on her dad's credit card for herself, thinking her dad wouldn't notice. He eventually did notice and told her it's an early Christmas present. Next story. Freshman college roommate was raised with help in the house and didn't expect or know how to clean up after herself. It was a spendy private school. She eventually got the hang of it and was quite tickled with herself. I was able to be a student there via a sports scholarship. I taught her how to make her bed, buy soap, etc., and do laundry. Next story. My girlfriend worked as a house manager for a rich guy here. Huge 6-bedroom house, but he lived alone. He had a chef, 2 gardeners, a butler, 2 staff, and my girlfriend. They washed and changed all the beds every 2 weeks. Nobody ever stayed there. All towels were washed and folded a particular way every week. He was very strict about time and would review the ins and outs of the staff every Monday morning and nitpick the minutest things. She quit after 2 weeks. She was so disgusted and appalled at the whole thing. She just took the job because she needed the money, but she quit, and her words to me were, "I feel dirty just working there." Next story. I worked for a company that got listed at the stock exchange. Big deal for the company, of course, and for the owners. One of the directors/owners of the company was appalled that not every one of his employees jumped at the chance to buy stock once it became available. "Well, why not just buy a few grand? Just to show your support." Next story. I piloted a launch for a yacht club on Cape Cod, which means I would take a Boston whaler out to moored yachts, pick up visiting yachtsmen and their guests, and bring them to the yacht club for events/dinners, etc. during regattas. Most of them were very nice, tipped well, and of good humor, and of course had gorgeous yachts, which I often admired. One of the yachtsmen was quite friendly, and we ended up on a first-name basis with one another. I saw him for the first regatta of the season, but the next time I saw him, it was plainly obvious that he had purchased a new yacht, which was even more impressive than his last. I complimented him on it, and he took me aside and asked me not to gush over it in front of his wife. It turned out that due to a recent illness, she had difficulty boarding his last yacht, so he replaced it with this one, which was much easier for her to board. Really nice guy, and super sweet of him to do for the love of his life. And the dude just plonked down $2 million on a new yacht. I think more than buying the new yacht, the sweetest part is asking OP not to talk about it. Like, he clearly knows that his wife was embarrassed by it, and instead of flaunting off this brand new yacht he got, he cares a lot more about his wife's, I don't know what to call it, emotional well-being, I guess. And that really is super sweet. Next story. By definition, I'm wealthy now, but I worked for a billionaire once and became friendly with the couple. His wife invited my wife and I to Hawaii. I thought she meant in a few months. She meant tomorrow. Just pop off in our jet and join her. At the time, I was working a real corporate job with intense responsibilities for her husband. She was a kept woman trophy bride. Her husband came to hate her and divorced, giving her only $10 million. Next story. I used to work in a security company that catered to some of the filthiest, richest people on the planet in the North County, San Diego County area, Rancho Santa Fe, La Jolla, Del Mar, and some other disgustingly rich areas. Doing walkthroughs for a security proposal, and the homeowner, who has lived there for 10 years, discovered new bathrooms and bedrooms they weren't aware of. Outdoor fixtures, gardens they don't remember putting in. I once had a client that forgot he had an entirely different wine/stockhouse in his second basement full of high-value rare wines. A client asked what kind of car I drove, and I said a Ford Ranger. He thought I said Range Rover, and proceeded to talk about how he preferred one model of Land Rover over the other, and how he's thinking of picking up a third. It wasn't uncommon to work on deals over lunch or a cocktail. They would order whatever they wanted, and I would usually order a soda, but these places didn't have soda. They had soda water with lime, or Perrier with lime, or whatever. They would always ask why I wasn't drinking with them. I would have to explain that I'm at work, and I have a gun on my hip, and I'm in uniform. I'd be sweating over the menu because nothing has a dollar value on it, and so I would order chicken, whatever, and they would get annoyed with me, but then if I ordered something nice, they would make some annoying comment. Second generation wealth was almost always out of touch, from what common folk cared about or did for fun, to what we ate, drove, where we lived, etc. First generation wealth was the guy/girl that could talk to you and be at your level and be respectful and be kind and aware to protect you from embarrassment. I just know I butchered one of those place names. La Hiola? I don't know. Lajolla. I assume it's Spanish, but I could be totally wrong. Next story. Earlier in my career, I installed the Wi-Fi in the CEO of a Fortune 50 company's home. It took 16 access points to cover the square footage of the main house, with 3 being for density coverage in a conference room/formal dining room/ballroom type setup, not sure what to call it. He had 3 network closets in his home. He also had entirely separate business circuits built out to his house from multiple carriers, redundancy, so he could work from home. This was 2016-ish. This didn't include the residential circuits to each house on the property. The guest house on the property took another 6 access points. Pool house had another 3. Biggest residence I've ever seen, and I guarantee that guy probably had rooms in his house he didn't know existed. Next story. Architect, working in high-end residential for the 0.1%. Couple thoughts. Clients have never been to a grocery store, kitchens and fridges fully stocked before walking into their newly completed home, likely their 3rd or 5th. $700,000 custom fabricated wine room for a couple that doesn't drink. Her closet twice the size of my condo and still not big enough. Almost all are preppers for the end-of-the-world economy scenarios with backup micro-power plants, guns for hunting game, and yet none know how to cook for themselves without their personal chef. Next story. I'm a plumber. In the middle of COVID, I was hired to do some work on a huge 11-bedroom home in the mountains that had been left vacant for many years and needed a complete renovation. The guy who owned the houses decided he wanted to project manage it and be super hands-on, so he hired all of the subcontractors individually and put us to work. While repairing certain aspects of the plumbing, we opened up drywall for access. He had a drywall guy on site and didn't want him sitting around doing nothing, so the drywall guy would come behind us and repair it, although we told him we'd still need access the next day or the day after that. The drywall guy was patching the same hole 2 or 3 times a week. The same guy had a bike accident and had to have his foot in a cast for a few weeks and bought himself a fully loaded Jeep Gladiator to, and I quote, cheer himself up. Next story. I didn't work for this woman, but she did frequent the fabric store I worked at. She would come in weekly, usually on Monday, and buy thousands of dollars of our best fabrics. Unrelated to the story, but she was a lovely older black woman who called me sugar and baby nonstop, and I missed that. Anyway, after a bit I asked her what she was using all the fabric for. She hosted dinner parties and used them as tablecloths. After the party was over, she'd throw them away and buy more for next week's party. Next story. Didn't witness it. Happened to me. Had to run a new underground electric service to her condo. Long story short, I'm in the trench tunneling under a sidewalk. Owner walks over telling me I should go back to school and that I'm going nowhere in life with what I'm doing. 100-degree day temper took over. I told her I hope she chokes on her lunch, and I couldn't be happier with what I'm doing. Look, you cannot be rich and then put down other people for what they do for work. Like, sorry it's not making them $10 billion. Not that a lot of you truly worked that hard for all your money anyway. In reference to like second generation rich people at least. But some people can be happy making, a good salary of over $100,000 a year in a trade. Not salary, but you know what I mean. Anyway, that's the last story for today. Sometimes reading stories about rich people, gets me a bit riled up, but I think it was mostly chill today. A lot of stories were like, oh, they were actually super nice. It was great. A little out of touch, but they had a good heart, and that's great. I love hearing that. The last story was a bit of a sour one to end on, unfortunately, but that's life. We take what the Reddit gods give us. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one. P.S. I got a new mic. How does it sound?